Welcome to Forward Progress on the Hammer Betting Network on this Tuesday, January 16th. Today, we're going to be talking about the wild card weekend fallout of Miami, Dallas, and Philadelphia all going down, and our first look preview of the divisional round. I'm joined again by an all-star cast. I've got Cleve TA plus EV Better, CleveAnalytics.com, Suma Pro Sports Better, creator on the Hammer Betting Network, and Sharp Clark, NFL originator, betting analyst at 4for4.com. Do me a favor, like and subscribe to this content. It is greatly appreciated. It helps us boost us up in the algorithm. Also, any comments or questions you have, shoot them our way, and we'll get to as many of them as possible. Of course, none of this will be possible without our sponsor, Pinnacle. Pinnacle is the world's sharpest sports book and available to bettors in Ontario. Find out what the pros have known for the last 25 years. Everyday competitive odds, your trusted sports book. Bet smart, bet Pinnacle. Must be 19 plus in Ontario. Gentlemen, let's get this show on the road. And I want to talk about last night and specifically the Philadelphia Eagles going down. First, I want to pull up this clip and see if you guys remember a time when Nick Sirianni was on top of the world and had no problem telling opposing fans what he thought of them. That was their second last biggest win. They would also go on to beat Buffalo in a game that they probably didn't deserve to win. And then the collapse happened at the end of the year. This team went 10-1 and is now out of the playoffs in the first round. Suma, lead us off today. What was the biggest catalyst for this collapse in Philadelphia?
I think it's a combination of really, really bad defense, bad coordinated defense, and an offense that is playing with a banged up quarterback that has zero answers to some basic stuff that defenses are throwing at them. For example, the blitz. Like, we have seen it for several weeks now that when teams throw blitzes at this Eagles offense, they have no clue, no hot routes. They have no concept how to beat it. And it doesn't help that Hurts is playing banged up and not running too much. Like they don't call too many design runs for him and stuff like that. It really feels like a different offense. And I think in hindsight, we mentioned it in the offseason, but in hindsight, losing Shane Steichen really was bad for this offense. So it's a combination of terrible defense and an offense with a banged up quarterback that cannot give you good solutions to very common problems, I would say.
Cleve, so that was the big topic of conversation in the offseason of, hey, you lost both coordinators, Gannon and Steichen. How are you going to bounce back? My question is this an indication that teams should probably be hiring guys at head coach that are capable of calling one side of the ball? Either that or have a succession plan, like at least with the Bills. You know, they lost Dable, but they had Ken Dorsey in the wings. And then they lost Dorsey, but they signed Joe Brady to learn under him, right? They at least had a backup option at play caller. Brian Johnson wasn't good enough. And is that where the major failings happened?
Yeah, honestly, I don't think the offense per se was really the issue. I mean, they were still top 10 in EPA. They, were rolling along for much of the season until, injuries started piling up the wide receiver core at the end. And, look, Jalen Hurts has his flaws. He doesn't throw over the middle of the field at all. And like Suma said, against things like the blitz, like just has no answers to that. And maybe that's coaching. But I just think in general, the offense was good enough to make a run here like that. If you had a league average defense, you probably win that game last night. You actually have a shot to get to another Super Bowl. So I don't know. I mean, I don't think, probably the offensive coaching staff isn't great, but I personally don't think. I think between just some of the injuries, I said Hurts. I agree. Hurts did not look right ever since I think that Miami game. He was kind of limping around some of his runs. He couldn't get around the corner really ever. A lot of times he would just kind of stop and slide or just kind of run out of bounds. So I think there's something going on with him that's more than what's out there. But I think it's a combination of those things offensively. But I think overall, the general direction of the offense, I think is fine. Like, I don't think that's an area to really be concerned about it. The defense is a joke. I mean, it was just, they got no pressure at all this year. Last year, they they masked some of the secondary concerns because they set a record for sacks, got to the quarterback at a record rate, and it masked some of the issues in the secondary. Jonathan Gannon, for all the Philly fans have to be like, I don't think they know what they do with themselves, because all the people that blamed him for having a top 5 defense and getting to the Super Bowl, and yeah, Patrick Mahomes is going to do that to a lot of guys. He saved that defense because his strategy was to keep everything in front, limit explosive plays, even if that meant that the elite quarterbacks are kind of essentially going to pick you apart over the middle. It's clear that the linebacking core and the secondary just isn't good enough, to be honest, to play man up. So. The defense this year just wasn't up to snuff, and they couldn't tackle. And then they dealt with some injuries, and Slay and Bradbury are not the same, and Slay's got hurt, and all those things kind of piled up. So it's definitely they definitely have to revamp this back end of the defense, and maybe rethink how they go about from a personnel perspective with the linebacking core, because that's where they got burned the most, is over the middle and the intermediate part of the field.
Well, Clark, you made the point that Jalen Hurts was probably in one of the best situations last year, probably the best O-line in football, multiple weapons, Goddard, AJ Brown, Devontae Smith, a good run game. Then you had to pay the guy, and you paid him top of the market money. And now you got like 7 guys in the secondary that are 30 years and older. This is a slow aging secondary. You have a lot of holes that you have to address. It's a lot more difficult now that you're paying your quarterback. Is that going to be a problem revamping this roster? Are the Eagles actually in a bit of a downslide?
I think so. I actually do have some concerns about both sides of the ball moving forward. Jason Kelce is retiring, and he was absolutely massive for this offense. We're seeing the offensive line get a little bit older. They didn't play very well last night, and I don't know whether it's a bad game or whether some of these guys are just at the end of their run. But without a good offensive line, Jalen Hurts' time to process gets sped up, and he hasn't been good when he's had a sped up time to process. The other thing you didn't mention in his circumstances last year is Shane Steichen. Like, he had a great play caller who just almost took the Colts to the playoffs with Gardner Minshew. And I think he's shown that when he has all those structures in place, the time in the pocket, the great playmakers downfield, the really good scheme, like, he can succeed. But I'm not sure that he's going to be able to keep the team's keep the team meeting expectations in the face of losing offensive linemen and not being able to replace some of these defensive players. Their defense was also propped up last year by a really easy schedule. When they played good offenses, they weren't good. So the regression on defense was a little bit predictable this year. I think the whole team just suffered from overly high expectations from a really unreal playoff run last year where everything kind of fell into place. And then they capped it off with a truly great performance in the Super Bowl that made it look like the whole thing was justified. But really, they just played a top 5% game for themselves in that Super Bowl. And that was really all they did last year that was impressive enough to warrant the expectations they had this year.
Well, and last year, if you remember, so not only do they lead the league in sacks, they also had a great positive turnover run for a while. It's like, okay, some of that will come back to roost. Let's talk about Sirianni. Yes, Shuma, what did you want to say?
I just want to add, last season, their defense also had Darius Slay for, I think, all the games in much better form. They had TJ Edwards at linebacker, who was much better than what they had this year. James Bradbury was a capable quarterback too, and they had Monte Maddox in the slot, who got injured week 4 or something, and did not play for the majority of the season. So they also got some bad luck in the injury category.
And CJ Gardner-Johnson was also a big
part. Yeah.
I'm surprised they had to let him go, considering he went pretty cheap for 1 year in Detroit. All right. Nick Sirianni, very confident, cocky coach. A lot of people didn't like how he rubbed them. One of the fans threw popcorn at him, an Eagles fan, as he was walking off. The Eagles have been known to fire great coaches despite success. They fired Andy Reid. They fired Doug Peterson, a year removed from a Super Bowl. So if you're the Eagles, should they move on from Sirianni? This question's going to go for all of you. And if so, who do you like as the replacement? I'll start off with Suma. And then the other option is, do you keep Sirianni and maybe replace the coordinators?
I think I keep Sirianni and replace the coordinators. I don't think that Sirianni or I don't witness Sirianni as the big issue here. Like TA said, that offense was still pretty solid overall, dealing with injuries and really, I think sometimes really poorly coached. Like going into Tampa Bay, you know that Todd Bowles is throwing so many blitzes at you, and you have zero answers. I mean, at some point, that's also a head coaching issue, I think, because he hired the guys and he gave them all the stuff to operate. But I think that Sirianni needs to take a deep look into the mirror and think about how he replaces those guys, because that switch to Matt Patricia midseason was awful, obviously, but I don't think that Sirianni really is the issue. I think there's enough of a sample size over three seasons now that Sirianni is a very solid coach. And I think next season, with a healthy quarterback, with new coordinators, we might be looking differently at that.
Yeah, he also Cleve makes a lot of it makes a lot of optimal decisions. Like, they are aggressive and they know when to go for it. Not just the tush push, but a lot of fourth and short. What do you do, Cleve? Do you think Sirianni should survive?
I think you only replace him if you can get one of these elite coaches, and whether if you think Belichick still has it, I still do. I think if you give him a real quarterback, he can take, he can add plenty of value. I think if you could replace him with someone like that, then I think you make the move. If not, like, I wouldn't fire Sirianni to just hire some young coordinator. Like, I don't think that's the answer. But I will say with Sirianni, he did. I do know this, that it's been out in the public, a couple of years ago when things, they were struggling in his first season after, about 7-8 games. He gave up play calling duties to Shane Steichen. And that's where things started to turn around the back half of that year. They made the playoffs, and then obviously last year. So, to Clark's point, losing Steichen was a big deal. And if you're sitting back and you're saying, all right, so this guy, when he first was calling plays halfway through his first season, we were terrible. We were like 2-5, 2-6. And we were only good when he gave up play calling duties for the last year and a half. And then now that, he kind of probably is much more engaged in the offense this year, maybe we're not as good, or maybe we're not making the same type of decisions. Maybe it was the coordinators, maybe it was everybody else but Sirianni who was, adding value here. I can see a reason to maybe, that's a way to make a move is find someone who can come in as a little more experienced that can add a little bit more value. I don't know. I'm just thinking offhand. We're not in that locker room. We don't know. But that's one. I mean, maybe that's why some of the rumblings have occurred. And then also Jalen Hurts, the way he answers questions, he never really supports Sirianni. He always is pretty vague on that stuff. So, there could be more than meets the eye when it comes to the locker room. And that's, that could go a long way with a roster like this. If that's what they think is going to help solve, that potential issue, then, that's something that they should take into consideration.
Clark, let's work under Cleve's assumption that you only fire him if there's a really good option. I'm going to present you three, and you tell me if you think the Eagles would be smart to make the switch, okay? Bill Belichick, first one up.
Yes.
Mike Vrabel.
Yes.
Jim Harbaugh.
Probably. I don't really know Jim Harbaugh that well. I don't watch college football. I know he was in the NFL a while back, but I mean, that was before I was as engaged. My assumption is the same as TA's, which is that there's information we don't know here. Like, if Sirianni acts the way he does in the locker room that he does publicly, I just don't like the guy at all. I can't remember ever rooting against a head coach. Like, there've been head coaches that I think make bad decisions, or, I wish they would make better decisions, but there's not been a head coach that I just actively root against the way that I do with Sirianni. And if he's lost any of his players with that kind of attitude, I think that it might be, beneficial for the team to clean house. If Jalen Hurts isn't behind his head coach, that's a big deal. But I don't know that. That's pure speculation. And without that kind of information, also, if he made the decision to hire or elevate Matt Patricia, that's on him. If it was someone else, that's not on him. So there's so many pieces of information here that I think people that making this decision have that information. We don't. And I think that's crucial for making a decision if you're the Eagles.
Let me say something real quick too. It should be noted, Sean Desai was not their first choice in DC. All right. I know a little bit about this, and he he was like their 5th choice.
Yeah.
So like that was not, so maybe it's literally as simple as, all right, you got to get your guy to come here and play defense or to coach defense. And maybe that's why Patricia was elevated, because he was not, and again, people are defending this eye. It's not like the defense was good in the first, 8-10 games, whatever it was.
No, it got marginally worse. Like people,
it got marginally worse. It was still bad. It wasn't great.
That went bad. Yeah, it wasn't.
Especially compared to the schedule that they faced. So I don't know. There's so many different things here. And it would have been nice to have a better succession plan for a guy like Sirianni or Shane Steichen, but that's hard to do. It's hard to develop within, and not everyone is a star, from a coaching perspective. But they're going to do something, whether it be replacing Sirianni or just replacing both coordinators. But I think they're definitely going to do something.
All right, let's move on to Dallas. Suma, Dallas was the only higher seed to lose this week. Every other home team won. We had a lot to say about McCarthy's great play calling and Dak having one of his best years ever. And my question to you is, does that all get invalidated the second you lose as the 2 seed when you're expected to win? Is that out the window? Is Mike McCarthy's goodwill all burned up here?
I think it matters from the Cowboys' point of view, because all they care about is reaching the NFC Championship game, at least, not or even the Super Bowl. So having this kind of season and losing in the playoffs might not be that bad for many other teams, but it's bad for the Cowboys. I think, or I expected them to move on from Mike McCarthy. At least watching Jerry in the stands and what he said after the game, I really immediately thought that he's going to fire Mike McCarthy. So I'm a little bit surprised that he hasn't already. But to be honest, like, what would a different coach have done differently is my question. Like, the Cowboys had a good season, won 12 games. Then in the playoffs, their defense completely collapses against a super aggressive and smart Packers offense. And Dak Prescott throws 2 really awful interceptions. Like, I can understand why you want to move on from Mike McCarthy, but I don't see the case that, hey, a different coach would have won that game against the Packers or whatever. I think this is just it was a super talented team. They will have a lot of decisions to make with their roster, lots of free agents, but I don't think that any other coach would have done completely differently in this situation.
Clark, isn't it funny how reputations are perceived even in the face of a lack of evidence? Like, Philly's seen as this, very analytical organization, smart, and you think like a team that doesn't want to rock the boat, and they'll pull the trigger and fire a coach. And then Dallas, Jerry's perceived as this hothead, can act emotionally, but he's given all his coaches some rope. Like, he's let them have their time out. Now, that being said, Bill Belichick wasn't available before now. And there's got to be some of Jerry that's intrigued of firing McCarthy to bring in Bill, right?
Yeah, and this is a very difficult spot for the Cowboys because, kind of like what Cleve TA said about the Eagles, if you can find someone better than McCarthy, then I think you should at this moment. But there's no guarantee you're going to be able to find someone better than McCarthy. And, how can you surreptitiously go about a job search to replace a guy that you don't want to tell him that you've lost confidence publicly? And I think that makes for a really tough spot, because if you could guarantee, if Belichick came in, it's like, I will coach for you if you will hire me, I think Jerry Jones would probably fire McCarthy and say, come on, Bill. But that's different than, let's interview Bill while he's choosing, where he wants to go. And then the rumor gets out that McCarthy's lost confidence, and now you have to move on. And now maybe you're stuck with someone that's never coached before, or someone in a more precarious situation, and you could be taking a back step in a time where your roster is good enough to compete in the NFC. So that's a really, really tough balance. I think Mike McCarthy is fine as a head coach. I think we overreact sometimes to single results, and playoff games, there's a lot of variance. Things happen, like Jair makes that interception. Refs could have called a flag, maybe. changes some of the outcome of that early game. Like there's just so many things that happen in a game that I think hammering McCarthy because he lost 2 playoff games, one against a very good 49ers team. I don't know. He's put on enough body of work for me to have confidence in him as a head coach. But if you can upgrade, I would try to.
All right, Cleve, let's walk down this lane, okay? Once upon a time, Jerry brought in Bill Parcells. And, Belichick has many Parcells tendencies. He learned from him. The problem is Jerry is a very involved owner. Like he's the only owner GM as far as I know in the NFL. And Bill's had the most power of a head coach in the NFL for a long time. Is it possible these two could coexist?
Well, it sounds like at the press conference, he did say that he doesn't have to, to be the GM wherever he goes. Like that, the personnel decisions don't have to all be with him. So it sounds like he's willing to give that up. I think at his age, I think he just wants to coach. Quite honestly, I think he'd probably be okay with kind of hands off of the personnel, but you never know when you actually get in there. But I mean, I think at some point you have to just put your hands up and be like, all right, I'm not doing well here in this specific role. He's smart enough to figure that out. And, you hear other people that know him well. Sounds like he's not that egotistical from the personnel standpoint. Now he does have a culture, a type of player that he likes. So I could see him saying this guy doesn't fit in our locker room, or it doesn't kind of fit what I'm looking for. Like maybe let's replace him. So I can see him kind of changing over some guys that's currently in there. But in terms of, I need to run the draft, I'm not sure he's going to ask for that. But again, it's just speculation. I will say one real quick thing. Stu said it wasn't the coaching. I'm not a McCarthy fan, never have been. He didn't. How many Super Bowls did he take Aaron Rodgers in his prime? Once. Didn't really advance that deep as often as you would think. He's made mistakes the last couple of years in playoffs, end of game situations. He always is a terrible end of game coach. He did increase his early down pass rate this year, which is the one thing that you can kind of give him credit for. He did adjust that way, but they weren't throwing the ball early in this game. I mean, they actually had a 30% early down pass rate in neutral game situations. So it's not like there's that many plays. But early in the game, I don't think he called a good early situation, early game situationally, offensively, and that led to some of them being put in the hole. And then defensively, they're playing with light boxes all consistently early in that game, and they're just running Aaron Jones right down their throat, and they didn't adjust at all. So there could be merit to he could have made a few changes here during that game to adjust things. I just don't think he's a good coach. I think he's a good regular season coach. I don't think he's a guy that I put my faith in and my trust in to win me a Super Bowl. But, and I think the roster has enough pieces in it to make a run. So I could see them making that change.
I totally forgot, and thanks to Beat Gamer for reminding me that Dave Tepper is also the GM of Carolina and decides who they should take first overall and stake their whole franchise to. All right, Bill Belichick fired a week ago, or they stepped down, mutual parting of the ways. He's got 3 amazing options potentially: Dallas, Philadelphia, Atlanta. Which one would attract you the most? Obviously Philly and Dallas have the most ready-made roster and the quarterback in place, but Atlanta's got a fantastic owner. He would get a lot more say in the roster decision-making and a soft division. Suma, let's start with you. If you're Bill, which of those 3 jobs appeals to you the most?
Yeah, you hinted at it. I think the most interesting question is whether Bill would simply take a classic head coaching role, or whether he wants to be that CEO type of guy again, because he will not get that at Dallas. There's not going to be a
Howie Roseman is not going to let him decide
yes,
an offensive guard 26th overall. That won't happen.
Yes, can you imagine them sitting in a war room and Belichick overruling Jerry on a player who to take at the draft spot 26th? I can't see it. I mean, in Atlanta, it's Terry Fontenot. I think that's a softer structure for Bill to get into. So I would lean Atlanta. And it's not like Atlanta needs too much to rebuild or stuff like that. I mean, they need a new quarterback, but the offensive roster is pretty well rounded. There are some pieces on defense. So out of those three, I would probably see Atlanta as the best fit.
Yeah. Cleve, Clark, let's start with you, Clark. Which of those three do you think is the most appealing?
For me, I think it depends on what his goal is. If his goal is to break the wins record, then I would think Dallas. But if his goal is more legacy focused and like, can I build another really good team? Then I think Atlanta is the place to go, where there's some cap room, there's some, winnable divisional games. There's sort of a growth arc there. So I don't know whether he's looking at this like, man, I got to coach a couple more years to get that record, or if he just wants to coach until he can't coach anymore and like is serious about building, a long-term successful franchise like he did in New England. So I think for me, those are the two options that hinge on his goals.
Cleve?
Yeah, I would probably put Atlanta last, just because a guy in his 70s still doesn't have a quarterback. Like, who's quarterbacking for Atlanta? What are their great options? Like, I don't know. There's nothing there that I could sit there and say, all right, well, we've got a quarterback, just a young quarterback on a rookie deal. We don't even know. They're not even drafting high enough right now to guarantee themselves a top 3 quarterback here. So I would push it. I mean, I like Atlanta. I think Vrabel Atlanta is perfect, but I mean, either Philly or Dallas. I'd go Philly just because I think the organization is better, more stable than Dallas. So I just go with Philly.
Yeah, I can almost promise you wherever he goes, I think Josh McDaniel is the chalk favorite to be the new offensive coordinator. All right, I've been avoiding this. Let's start with Clark. You mentioned once upon a time, maybe this morning or last night, that the difficulty when you pay Jalen Hurts top 5 quarterback money, building a roster around him is very difficult. If you're GM of the Dolphins, what do you do with Tua's situation? Do you extend him? Do you let him play out a 5th year?
It's a tough question. I think Tua and Hurts are different in the sense that Hurts' success was built on elite weapons and elite offensive line play, whereas I think Tua's success is built on elite weapons and elite scheming. And the reason why that distinction matters is because McDaniel is staying with Miami. The scheme will be there. The question is, can they fill in enough explosive players on offense? When Tyreek Hill leaves, can they replace that? And if they can, like, his time to throw is so quick, he's not relying on elite offensive line play. So I think that makes it more likely that Tua's success will continue even if he gets paid. But I also think that if you pay him too much, then you do cripple yourself in terms of team building, especially on defense. But I would be fine extending Tua for the right price, like more of a Dak Prescott range contract, maybe even a little cheaper, maybe Kirk Cousins. But if he's demanding the type of payment that the very, very top 5 guys get, I would rather him make him play on a 5th year contract, 5th year option. I know that it's a business and there's way more considerations than what is the optimal decision for our Super Bowl winning chances. There's so much more to it than that. But just off the cuff, I don't think that paying Tua a top 5 rate would be beneficial for the Dolphins franchise.
I tend to echo that. I think Kyler Murray's contract, I think he's like the 7th highest paid guy now, around $43 million is probably where you need to aim. That being said, Cleve, what do you think the extension will look like? Obviously, his agent's going to push for top money. Is Tua and obviously when Trevor Lawrence gets his deal and Dak and Mahomes redoes it, it won't be top 5 again. But when he signs on the dotted line, do you think he's a top 5 paid quarterback in that moment?
I don't think so. I personally I don't agree with paying, decent, not great quarterbacks elite money. Like, I just refuse to do that, because we've just seen that you can find competent enough, I'm not saying like great quarterback play for way cheaper and build around it and then kind of bridge yourself to find that guy. Like, we just seen it too many times, and you get the guys like Goff and Wentz and even Flacco back in the day, that just because the teams felt like they had to pay them just because they were winning, they had to do it and their time was up. But realistically, none of them panned out at the end of the day. And we see it all the time. It's like the Andy Dalton line. Like, once you're in that Andy Dalton range, like, you can't pay that guy elite money. It just cripples the rest of your roster. So I personally, especially with the system that we've seen, has worked with expensive quarterbacks. Like, I think there are ways to find quarterbacks good enough to make the system work. And if you've got guys like Waddle and Tyreek Hill, and now you've got, Chain at running back, like you've got explosiveness all over the field. You just need a point guard to get him the ball. Like, I don't think the added value above what you're going to have to pay like a cheaper quarterback is worth it for a guy like Tua.
All right. Suma, we saw Tua's limitations if he's not playing in a dome or warm weather. When it gets into, blizzard or rain or anything where you need to rely on some physical advantages, Tua just doesn't have that in him. What is Miami's ceiling with Tua? Like, they have to be a home seed because, God, you play in a conference with Joe Burrow and Lamar Jackson and, Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen. If you're going on the road, you're playing in cold weather 2 to 3 times to get to the Super Bowl. What is Miami's ceiling with a guy like Tua?
I wouldn't even argue too much with the weather because we saw him completely having games in domes in good weather, like first game at Buffalo this year. In Frankfurt against KC, it was in a dome, roof was closed. Against Buffalo in week 18, last year at San Francisco in a dome against the Chargers. So I think we have a decent sample size that he is very good within the confines of the scheme, with arguably the best 1-2 punch at wide receiver against worse defenses, not the great ones. But as soon as there is a defense that can take something away in this offense, we see drastic limitations. Like Bills and KC did a great job at taking away the middle of the field. Some teams, I think it was the Eagles earlier this year, correct me if I'm wrong, they completely erased the run game. And as soon as you take something away from this offense, Tua is not the guy who can create out of structure, can get physical with his legs. I think he has like a few scrambles for like 2 yards per carry or something this year. So he is clearly lacking the physical upside. And I think as soon as some defenses figure out how they can take something away, he gets completely limited. And that's, in my opinion, not a guy you want to pay top of the market money going forward, because if you pay him top of the market, we all know that you don't have as much money anymore for the rest of your team. So, I mean, he's probably still better, but it reminds me a little bit of the Jimmy Garoppolo discussions from like 2 or 3 seasons ago. Like, Garoppolo was playing at a very high production level, top 3 EPA per play success rates in that Shanahan offense. But sometimes there were games where he's severely limited. He did not possess the physical traits, pocket passer. I think Tua is better than him, but it reminds me a little bit of that discussion.
Yeah, what I think the Dolphins probably should do is you try to get him in at a Kyler Murray number, but I also think you need to start looking for potentially the next guy, and maybe take a gamble on someone in round 2 with physical traits that you can develop, like the way Green Bay developed Jordan Love and Rodgers before that, right? Smart organizations that realize you have to be developing the next guy. Let's get into the games then. Houston at Baltimore. I'll tell you what, I think Houston has found their guy. CJ Stroud probably is the best looking rookie quarterback since ever. Houston lost Noah Brown for the season. Jerry Hughes is injured. For the Ravens, the last time we saw them, Marlon Humphrey, Odafe Owe, and Zay Flowers were hurt. We don't know their status coming out of the break. Right now, it's -9.5 plus 102. Suma, let's start with you. There was a lot of discussion on what this game should open up at. Some saying as high as 9.5, 10. It opened at 9, and it's mostly 9 with a few 9.5s out there, but they're juiced one way. Are you surprised by this open? Do you expect it to move in a direction either way?
No, I'm not really that surprised. I don't think it ever had a big chance to get to the 10, because when you look at the Texans offense, like, we are at a point, I think you guys all agree that Stroud is probably going to be a very, very good quarterback, like top 8-ish guy in the league. If you had to rank quarterbacks going to next season, he will probably land somewhere in that 5 to 8 range. Clark maybe higher. And he is paired with a decent offensive line and a smart play caller who had some issues when it comes to run rates and stuff like that. But overall, I think the way that they made the supposed to be best defense in the league look like a college unit on some of these plays. Sorry, TA. But I think that is a pairing of a probably very, very good quarterback. And I don't think that you can get these types of offenses 10 points in like any playoff setting. So I was not very surprised that this is below the 10. And it also took some Texans money like 1 hour ago or something.
Yep. Clark, it opened 46 and a half. Been bet down to 44. There's some 44 and a halves out there. What's driving that? Is it weather or was it too high a number? Like, what kind of game does this profile as to you?
I think there's several reasons for that move. The first is potential weather is always going to drop totals. But I think there's a chance. Okay, so we saw last week the Texans go against an elite defense in the Browns, but I talked about how the Browns' defensive performances, most of their really, really good performances came against bad offenses, and they just absolutely crushed them and smothered them. The Ravens are a little different. They actually have crushed some very good offenses. The Lions come to mind. The Seahawks, an offense with a pulse. They absolutely smacked them. Miami, they did a very good job against the 49ers. They really smacked around. And so the idea that the Ravens would be able to shut down CJ Stroud, I think is much more plausible than the idea that the Browns would be able to. So that's one thing. And then the other side, weather not only brings down totals generally, but I think there's a couple of things about Lamar Jackson specifically. One is, he has had fumbling issues sometimes. There have been some fumbled snaps in key moments in the past. Weather tends to increase those. And he's also much more reliant on downfield passing this year than he has been in previous years, which has been a great thing. It also means that he might be more susceptible to an offensive drop-off in bad conditions than he may have been in the past when he was more likely to just tuck and run. So I think that's kind of a factor is how much you have to answer the question of how much you think Lamar is going to shift towards being more aggressive in the run game, because I think if he does that, then I think it's going to be beneficial for the Ravens, and especially if the weather's bad.
Well, Cleve, let's talk about the weather. Right now, it looks like heavy wind and freezing cold. Who does that affect more, Stroud or Lamar?
It's absolutely Stroud. So as a proud Ohio State alum, has watched every snap of CJ Stroud's career at Ohio State. The one area that he struggled in, well, it was pressure, but everybody struggled with pressure, was any sort of windy, rainy conditions. He just wasn't nearly as effective. And then against Northwestern last year was a perfect example. Now that was like 30-mile-an-hour winds, but he couldn't complete a pass. It was really, really bad. And then even this year, he's played some kind of bad weather games in Baltimore in the opener. That was just rain mainly. Against the Jets, he was atrocious. I mean, horrendous. And that was a game where Zach Wilson threw for 300 yards. It was raining. It was some wind, but he looked terrible. So, we do have a couple of examples of when he's had to face any sort of kind of adverse conditions from a weather perspective. He's not nearly as good. Now, again, sample size small, but that's all we can go by so far. And again, he was awesome against the Browns. You can use their aggressiveness against them and take some deep shots, which they did. He was good. He was not getting pressured. They did not get to him at all. So that was a good job by the offensive line and by Bobby Slowick, who, out of nowhere just decided to not run the ball on every first down, which was surprising after the prior week against the Colts. So I thought he called a great game. I don't know. It'll be interesting. I think Mike McDonald is one of the better, maybe the best defensive coach in the NFL right now from a scheme standpoint, a strategy standpoint. So he's got an extra week to prepare against a rookie quarterback. They've already faced him once. So that's going to be positive. And, it's a tough spot for a rookie quarterback who only has really one wide receiver to go to. I mean, he's got no other options. So I can see McDonald really, taking Nico Collins away a little bit more than the Browns did. And, then what are you going to go to? The other side of the ball, Lamar has faced, windy conditions in the past, not necessarily been that successful, but, even a handful of weeks ago in Jacksonville on that Sunday night, that was a really windy game and he was fine. So he at least has experience in it, but Houston's a really good run defense. So if they are forced to run the ball, that's going to, kind of play into the Houston Texans' hands. So it might keep them, in this game longer than they maybe should be. But I think it's definitely an advantage when it's all said and done to Baltimore, just because we've seen him be successful. We've seen Lamar Jackson be successful in it, and we've never really seen Stroud be successful in it.
Suma, we all remember the game where Bobby Slowick figured out he's got a franchise QB. They were down big against Tampa, and their kicker was out, and he decided, let's just throw the ball. And wow, Stroud's pretty good. He also let him cook last week. Do you expect this to continue, pass first mentality, or do you think Bobby Slowick's going to revert back to his old ways eventually?
Tough to say. Really tough to say. I really hope that he would not go back to his old ways, because I like good football, and imagining this Texans offense pounding the rock on early downs against that Ravens defense is not something I would like to see come Saturday. So wait and see mode for me.
Clark, remember last year, this specific round, all the big favorites in the bye week teams were in teaser range, and everybody said, that's just, it's too obvious. No way this teaser can hit. And like they all fucking hit. Like if Baltimore gets to 8.5, is it an automatic teaser to 2.5?
No, I don't think so. And I'm trying to remember what the other spreads are. Is there even a second leg?
Yeah, there's one in the final game we'll talk about.
Oh, right. Okay, yeah. I mean, no, not for me. I think that Stroud presents a lot of variance in this matchup, and you don't want to be betting teasers into variance. Like, there's a chance based on the way he's played the last 3 weeks since his injury that he just is the guy. He is the next Patrick Mahomes, Tom Brady type player where he's getting 9.5 points. You just bet on him. We're not there yet. I'm not saying that's who Stroud is, but that's within his range of outcomes. And so if that's the case, I don't really want to tease a leg on Baltimore, even down to 2.5. So if this was a much more predictable outcome, then I would tease it, but not in this situation.
Cleve, Josh Allen ran the ball a lot this week. And like I started to think about, he didn't run much this year, but it's almost as if they were preserving his body and not taking the hits. But when the chips were down, they realized how big a weapon Josh Allen's legs are. Is there a chance that Lamar, who maybe didn't run as much, might get more run because they realize, hey, we've got 2 home games and then we're in the Super Bowl? Is that a situation that you might be monitoring?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, he just didn't really need to run, I guess, as much because the pass offense is a lot more prolific, I guess, as compared to prior years. So I don't know. I don't really know how to answer that. I'm not sure what his internal, like if he just wants to be a quarterback, wants to be a pocket quarterback, like that's his goal, and maybe he just wants to preserve himself. I don't know. That's something to definitely keep an eye on. But I'm sure if he has to use his legs to make plays, he'll do that. But I'm not sure that's going to be one of those where they're just going to call a bunch of design runs for him in this game. I'd be surprised at that, but I'm sure if he needs to use his legs, he will.
All right, let's move on to Green Bay, San Francisco. The last time we saw San Francisco, Arik Armstead hasn't played in a few weeks. A.J. Dillon missed last week. And the only injury to watch is Jair Alexander, who got hurt. Right now, Pinnacle's got -10 plus 100. It's essentially a 9.5. Let's start off with you, Clark. San Francisco opened 9.5, got bet up to 10, and then back down to 9.5. Does this number surprise you that there's some interest on both sides? Where do you see it going from here?
No, this one is a game where I'm pretty much right on market. Like I totally understand both sides of it. I've been riding the love, train for weeks now, but this is a very, very good 49ers team. And in particular, this is a 49ers offense that when they play bad defenses, they run over them. I mean, it's easy. It's like nothing's hard. Guys are open. The run game's working. And the Packers defense, although it's been playing fairly well the last couple of weeks, is still not a good defense. And I think the 49ers are going to be able to do whatever they want. But the reason why I don't want to bet the 49ers is because that is a huge spread to give a quarterback that's playing at the level that Jordan Love is. Similar to CJ Stroud, Jordan Love's been playing his best football late in the year in the last 3 or 4 weeks. And so that's just not a situation where I want to go into a game giving 10 points to a quarterback playing at that level. The Packers offense also can win on the offensive line in this game, even against a good 49ers defensive front. I think there'll be some wins on both sides, but what the Packers want to do is win in the run game and enforce defensive mistakes that Love can capitalize on downfield. And the 49ers secondary can make those mistakes. So I'm not confident enough in the 49ers to lay the points, but this is not a team that I'm looking to bet against in the playoffs.
All right, Suma, some recreational books opened the total 48.5. It got bet immediately. Sharper books opened at 49.5, 50. It's now at, around that number. If the weather clears up and holds, are you expecting money on the over? Like, does this profile as a game where we're going to see a lot of points scored?
Yeah, I tend to lean yes. I think 51 is probably a very good range if the weather clears. There might be some rain, but with a weather forecast like 5 days out, like rain timing can shift pretty easily. So we will see. I think 51 is a pretty good range. And to piggyback on what Clark has said, I mean, the Niners defense is not great this year. Like, we have seen teams throwing the ball on them, and with the way this Packers offense is playing, I think there will be opportunities to take advantage of. So I would expect both teams to score. So a total of 51 in that range with clear weather probably makes sense. And I also think it made some sense that we saw the spread coming off the 10 earlier today, because it's the same variance case for John Love as for CJ Stroud, because this is a very good offense against a non-elite defense, and I would not be surprised if the Packers can put up some scores here.
Cleve, you oftentimes will bet a team total as opposed to a total. I guess it's more of trusting one side to do their part versus the other. Jordan Love sometimes has a dud, right? We remember we were all high on him, and then the Giants game happened, and obviously he's put together a lot more good performances than not. Do you think someone might be better off taking a San Fran over as opposed to a game over, just because you at least know that San Fran will move the ball well, and it builds in case Jordan Love has the hiccups?
I don't know. I mean, it's such a high number. What is it? It's got to be about 30, right?
Probably going to be about 30, yeah.
Yeah, and so they'll always, I mean, the Niners are always at least sniffing around that number at worst. So you'll give yourself a shot, but if they get some turnovers early, or if Green Bay kind of struggles early, there is a case where the Niners, and Shanahan's a guy who likes to sit on the ball. He is not necessarily a guy that, will throw deep all the time in the fourth quarter when up two scores. Like he's more about he'll just run it out. So you would run the risk of maybe they go up, 24, 7, and they just kind of run the ball out. I don't know, but at least you give yourself a chance, because it like you said, it is, I always feel like they're sniffing around that number. I will say, and I know Clark, you were going back and forth with somebody mid last week about the Packers defense. And I think I chimed in that if you look at some of their performances when everyone's healthy, and I don't, when I say everyone, I mean the key guys like Alexander, Campbell, and Savage. Those are probably the 3 of their 4 best defenders. When those guys have been healthy together, they've only played like 5 or 6 games together. They've been really good. They actually have like a top 5 level EPA defense. Now that is against some bad opponents, so I do have to caveat that. But I don't think they're as bad as their kind of raw overall ranking is. And I think we saw some of that last week against Dallas. They played much better. They forced some turnovers. They did a really good job on Dak and that offense. So I would be a little concerned to just assume that this is the same Packers defense we saw most of the year. I think the way they are right now, they're a little bit better than maybe what we perceive. So that would give me a little hesitation on the total. But I was curious, I like to profile some of these games. You got a top 5 EPA offense right now at Green Bay. And I did this last week too with Dallas. You know how often a top 5 EPA offense has been an underdog to this degree in any round of the playoffs since 2000. It's only happened 13 times. The underdog is 10-4 after last week, so 14 times. So when you're getting a touchdown or more with this level of offense, and almost pretty much every time This has happened. The opponent, like the Niners, are a top 10 offense too. So it's not just one way. You're giving, like Clark said, you're giving a really good offense and a really good quarterback who's hot that many points. You're always live to not only cover, but win. And historically, at least in the last 20 plus years, these teams have been able to cover at a pretty high rate. So it's something to keep your eye on.
Beat Gamer reminds us that Mark Andrews was out there running around a little bit, and obviously we don't think he'll be ready for this game, but man, if they get to the Super Bowl and he's back, that'll be a big boost. Nathan asked earlier, which big dog do you like the most this week, guys? All right, let's stick to these two. Who's more vulnerable for an upset, San Francisco or Baltimore? Cleve, we'll start with you.
Wow, it's tough. I mean, more vulnerable. Like, I wish you could flip. I wish Green Bay was playing Baltimore, because then I would definitely say I think I'd pick Green Bay over Baltimore as the better chance. I just think matchup wise, it's just hard. I would say Baltimore only if it is. I mean, again, I haven't really looked at the weather today. I saw yesterday that there was some decent wind. So if there is some decent wind, or if it is kind of it increases the variance, then maybe Houston has got a better shot of winning. But I'll go with San Francisco as the vulnerable team, only because you still have Brock Purdy is still Brock Purdy, right? Like, as great as much as I've hyped him up, like, he can be slowed down. He doesn't have the pedigree some of these other quarterbacks that like a Lamar Jackson. So, if he does fall behind early, like, does he have the ability to come back? We don't know that really. And you do have a high level quarterback and offense, like I said, with Green Bay, which I think is a better offense in Houston right now. I would take Green Bay overall, just because I think Aaron Jones is so dynamic too. So I was going to say San Francisco amongst all of them is the most vulnerable.
I'd love to hear in the comments from people watching, who do you think
is a good question? It's a very good question.
Well, like we know in the NFL, Suma, that like the better quarterback usually wins, or at least the great ones win at a high rate in their career. Brock Purdy is probably not the better quarterback in the game, or at least it's close for discussion. And he's laying 9.5, right? Like in every other spot, Lamar is the better quarterback. Suma, who's more vulnerable, Baltimore or San Francisco?
Better QB getting points in the Niners-Packers game.
That's it,
That's
right?
what you wanted to say.
It's a lot of points, man. You're saying that he's not going to get blown out, Clark. Is that a sweep here? We all think San Francisco is the most vulnerable. You think it's Baltimore?
No, I think Baltimore is more vulnerable. I have more confidence in the consistency of the 49ers offense against that Green Bay defense than I do in the Ravens offense, which has been explosive, but also has had some misses and some times where things aren't working. They're also coming off 3 weeks since their last meaningful game. And so, the idea that maybe there's a chance they're rusty coming out, like has some plausibility. So CJ Stroud is also better than Jordan Love, in my opinion. I think Jordan Love's offensive structure is better, play calling and offensive line in particular. But CJ Stroud is a absolute stud at quarterback, and give me him for the live upset.
All right, let's go Tampa, Detroit. The only real injuries to watch are Khalif Raymond and James Houston, if he'll be back. Right now, the line is currently sitting at 6.5. And Cleve, there was a lot of debate about where this number would open at. Our friend Adam Chernoff said, floated the idea of Detroit -4. And that was before Tampa Bay dominated Philly. There was a lot of pushback amongst us who thought that was very generous or very short. And sure enough, despite a Tampa Bay blowout win, it opens up Detroit -6, and now it's up to 6.5. I guess my question is, does it continue that way, or do you think at some point there's going to be some Tampa interest?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's going to get to 7, if that's the question. When he said 4, I was like salivating. I said, "Oh, please!" And I had Tampa every which way last night, so I figured thought they could win. So I was like, "Oh, please have them win by 20 plus, so this could get down to 4, because then I would pound Detroit." But yeah, I think this number is about right. I thought it would be 5.5, 6. So once we start getting to 6.5, now it's getting a little bit rich. But I just think Detroit is the much better team. As much as I backed Tampa all year and in the offseason, like, there are limits to them, and they haven't faced the most difficult of schedules. And, this is going to be by far their toughest test in a while. So, I think that I think this is a tough ask. We've already seen these teams play once, and Baker had a single worst game from an EPA perspective all year against this Detroit defense, and that was at home. They, for whatever reason, he really struggled. Again, that was against the secondary, by the way, in their first game. They didn't have Brian Branch or CJ Gardner-Johnson. So those a couple of guys out that weren't even in there that are going to be in there this week. And then, the other side of the ball, I mean, Jared Goff was outstanding. He had 350 plus yards. And for him to do that in an outdoor game, that tells you something. And, and Tampa was healthy in that game too. And then, Detroit was missing Jonah Jackson. I think Laporta was hurt too. And they didn't have Jahmyr Gibbs, so they were not at 100%. They still blew that game out. Now, I know it was funny because I think, George, that was the game that you kind of eyed the Detroit. You watched the film and you said that there were some plays, left on the field. I think there were a couple deep balls that Baker missed that kind of opened your eyes to maybe this Detroit defense isn't nearly as good as maybe the number suggested. So maybe there's things I'd like to go back. I'm not a film guy per se. Like I watch every game, but I don't break them down. I might do that for this game because I want to see that with my eye. I remember watching it in the corner of my eye and seeing Tampa continually struggle, but maybe there were plenty of plays left on the field there that, could be used to our advantage here. Maybe, maybe that's why this number is kind of being inflated a little bit is what happened in that first matchup. But I'm curious to hear your thoughts if you want to tell us kind of what you saw in that game, because that could help me figure out what I want to do in this game.
Yeah, you just Twitter search Trey Palmer Lions, and you'll see Baker missed him on 2 wide open touchdowns where he got way behind everyone in the secondary. And Clark, we pinpointed this game, and I'm like, I know that it was 20-6, but I don't feel Tampa Bay got blown out in this game. And I don't want to break my arm patting myself on the back, but since then, Detroit games have averaged like 52 points a game. And their defense, started to get exposed for being bad, at least against the pass. The total's 48.5. Are we going to get a lot of points? Do you feel this is going to be a bit of like the Rams-Lions, where at one point it looked like neither team could stop either team? It was actually crazy. Like it felt like every single drive was going for a touchdown.
I came away from the Lions-Rams game a little bit more impressed with the Lions defense than I had been previously. I think they've been playing a little better, especially since they got Aline McNeil back. And I felt like that was more so Stafford making insane level plays as a quarterback than it was the Lions like letting stuff happen. It's kind of hard to distinguish sometimes when you're watching which of those two things it is, but I thought Stafford played an A+ game and the Lions still won outright. So I was impressed with the Lions in that game. And you always have the potential problem of, are the Bucs going to revert back to run, pass football? And if that's the case, like it gets hard to hit these big overs. If we can expect the same sort of aggressiveness and pass rate that we saw against the Eagles, then this total makes sense to me. But I have a few too many questions.
There was some plays though where like Puka is taking 15-yard catches into 50 because they didn't do a good job of tackling well. But that's actually the question I wanted to throw to you, Suma, was about the coaching. And stick with me here because I'm going to throw 5 questions at you at once. I guess my first one is Dave Canales didn't run into a brick wall last night. He decided to let Baker throw first. The other part is Todd Bowles drew up a great strategy. He went 0 blitz on Jalen Hurts and said, just beat us if you can. And I wonder who has is there a big coaching mismatch here? Because, Dan Campbell's uber aggressive and Todd Bowles can be passive at times. And then Ben Johnson's a brilliant offensive play caller. And sometimes Canales runs too often. Where do you think the coaching advantage lies in this game?
So I think that Ben Johnson's going to have an advantage against that Todd Bowles defense. I don't think that Tampa Bay's defense is really that good. I think that the Lions are probably set up to have a decent offensive game. But on the other side, I also think that Dave Canales against Aaron is a slight mismatch for the Lions. And I really like that. I think TA tweeted it today that the Bucs did go extremely pass heavy against that Eagles defense. And that's exactly the way they have to operate against the Lions, because the Lions defense is good against the run. Their
Yep.
only weakness is on man-dual runs, and the Buccaneers are averaging a 31% success rate on man-dual runs. So I don't think there's going to be many opportunities for the Bucs to gain yards on the ground. So they have to come out firing from all cylinders through the air. That's the way to attack this Lions defense, and that's the only way, in my opinion, for the Bucs to stay competitive in this game.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, like Anzalone and Jack Campbell, maybe they're good or good enough in the run defensive aspect, but like they can't cover for shit. Like Amon-Ra St. Brown could probably work and operate over the middle and have a lot of success. If Tampa comes out with the right game plan, I think they're going to move the ball well. I just don't know if they can stop Detroit. Let's go to the game of the weekend, and like this is the one the NFL wants. Anytime that they see Kansas City and Buffalo line up, they love it. Right now, Pinnacle is at 2.5 minus 113 to Buffalo. Let's start off with you, Suma. Buffalo is basically 2.5, 2.75. Some books opened up 3. Is this the one game we truly need to know about injury status before deciding? Like Wednesday's practice is going to be key because the Chiefs only have Kadarius Toney and like Derek Nandy injured. The Bills, Gabe Davis didn't dress, and neither did Rasul Douglas, and neither did Terrell Dotson or Taylor Rapp. And then on top of it, they lost everyone in the secondary. Taron Johnson got hurt, and Christian Benford, and 2 other linebackers, Terrell Bernard and Balin Spector, got hurt. Buffalo's got a lot of injuries. Is this a game where we have to find out the status of those guys?
Yes, it's a big injury game for Buffalo. I think Rasul Douglas will play. Taron Johnson is not in the concussion protocol. Correct me if I'm wrong. I have not checked Twitter recently, so could be wrong. So I think there's a decent chance that Buffalo will get some of those players back. And what I would say about the Chiefs, we talked about it a lot on the Wednesday or Thursday show last week. We thought that KC's issues on offense will probably get masked by a very bad and banged up Dolphins defense. And I think even if the Bills defense is not at full strength, I don't think that the Chiefs offense will have as easy of a game this week against that Bills defense. And I also think for once, we have not seen it before because this is Patrick Mahomes' first ever playoff road game. But I think the home field advantage might matter quite a bit to Buffalo here.
Cleve, I wonder what you think is the biggest advantage or mismatch in this game, because obviously both quarterbacks are capable of going sicko mode, but neither team stops the run very well, and maybe we see a little bit of a grinded out, maybe we're more physical than you type game. Where do you think's the one advantage, the biggest advantage, if you can pinpoint something?
Wow, I mean, I think this is a great matchup. There's really not much to say in terms of huge advantages one way or the other. I guess where I think the Chiefs secondary, I think their corners can get physical with the Buffalo receivers, and obviously we've seen Stephon Diggs is not the same guy. He's not the separator down the field that he has been. All the routes he ran yesterday were like 5-yard curls. Like he wasn't running anything really down the field. And so, we saw what Snead and McDuffie did against Tyreek Hill and Waddle, and not saying they're necessarily going to do that all game, but like, I think you get physical with these smaller, Bills receivers in general. And I think you can slow down that passing game. And we've seen like Buffalo is 21st in explosive pass rate. Like they're not pushing it down the field. And their one guy they push it down the field with is Gabe Davis. And he's, who knows if he's going to play. So it's going to be a lot of, short intermediary stuff. And I think that with Spagnuolo and this defense, I think they have a good job, or they have a good chance of, kind of keeping everything in front and making things difficult on Josh Allen. So I guess of all the things, of all the areas, I think that could be one of them in terms of, who has the advantage. Personally, like, I'm not wasting any more brain cells trying to figure out who's going to cover, who's going to, like, just give me the I know Clark said no, give me that 8.5 on the teaser leg with Kansas City all day. Like, I'm just going to take my chances that, that Mahomes doesn't get blown out here against a Buffalo team that really hasn't blown, doesn't blow as many teams out as we're used to. So, with the defense, with the Chiefs, and I think with all the injuries, with the secondary, especially in the linebacking core of Buffalo, I'll just take the 8.5 on a teaser leg and try to find, maybe I make it 7 points and bring down the Ravens. I'm not sure, but I think the teaser leg is really the route to go, at least for me. Like, I'm just not, there's not enough advantages here for me to love one side or the other. So that's the way I'm looking at this. Yeah,
I have an open teaser, Cleve, from last week. Houston end, and unlike Fezzik likes to throw people under the bus, and this guy was talking about tease Dallas to everything last week, and I'm like, oh, there's a little bit too much variance in this game in both quarterbacks. I'm not interested. I said I need to wait, and I'm fortunate enough to have a book where you can leave an open leg. This is probably the leg that I want to close it with. Clark, you jumped all over 3 when it opened. That line may never come back. Do you think teasing to 8.5 is a strong play here?
Yes, I do. The leg that I don't like is the potential Baltimore leg. I do love the Chiefs up to 8.5. And there was a fun wrestling match at open because it was like, we'd bet +3, minus 115, and then it would kind of go 2.5 minus 115. Someone would bet Buffalo. It was a fun little fight, but I'm happy to have any Kansas City +3s because this is the type of matchup that is really, really tight, and Buffalo's home field advantage is real, but also the Chiefs have a pretty good rest advantage in this one, again, like they did against Miami, which offsets a little bit of that home field advantage. And then Patrick Mahomes' experience in the playoffs, Andy Reid's experience in the playoffs, makes me not afraid to play the road team, even in what's going to be a hostile environment.
Well, here, so George, sorry, not to interrupt, not to piggyback on what you said. If you have a book that allows open teases and you can't find a second leg, like, think about what the AFC title game is going to likely be, right? Baltimore, KC, Baltimore, Buffalo. It's not going to be, you're going to get something in that range likely anyway. So you might get a second bite at it. So, if you're willing to do that, I think that's another angle. Yeah, for sure. All right. I guess
my friend -7.
You kind of led me to this question, Cleve. If you're Baltimore, right, and if they win, they're the first ones through, and you're watching Sunday's game, which team do you not want to see in the AFC Championship game? Suma, if you're Baltimore, which team are you more scared of, Buffalo or Kansas City?
Oh, great question. I would probably go with Buffalo.
Wow.
I think that
Buffalo you don't want to face or do face? Or you do want to face?
Don't want to face. So if I'm the Ravens, I would. Sorry. If I'm the Ravens, I would not want to face Buffalo.
Right.
So you think KC's the preferable option if you're Baltimore, Clark? If you're Baltimore and you win, who do you want your opponent to be the following week?
I want to play Buffalo. I don't want to play Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs in the playoffs with the best defense he's ever had again. Give me the Bills.
I love this. All right, Cleve, you get to break the tie. If you're Baltimore, which team do you not want to see?
Yeah, as much as I love Buffalo and Josh Allen, it's got to be, I don't want to face Patrick Mahomes. Like, I don't care, who he's got throwing to that with that defense and him, like, that is scary. That scares me to death. So I would definitely not. I mean, I'm not saying not saying Kansas City is necessarily the better team. I just think in a 1-game sample, I'll take my chances that if I'm Mike McDonald, I can confuse Josh Allen more than I can confuse Patrick Mahomes. It's probably the best way to put it.
I'm intrigued, man. I think the AFC is just a dream of matchups, 4 quarterbacks that are capable, and then a potentially banger AFC championship game. The NFC's got a little bit more like, if you're Detroit and you get to beat the Rams in Tampa to go to that's a pretty good break for you as far as brackets go. And like San Fran potentially home game against Green Bay, home game against Detroit or Tampa Bay. Like, we joked about the power 3 in the NFC, and 2 of them didn't make it out of the first round. So it's interesting.
What about this? Look at the quarterbacks for each conference. We're talking about, salary caps.
The 4 best quarterbacks are in the AFC right now.
Probably, and 3 of them are like making tons of money. The NFC, it's all like rookie deals or minimal, they're not making a lot of money. So it's like the complete diametrically opposed. It's pretty interesting.
It's going to be hilarious when the Chiefs are hosting another AFC Championship game next week against the Texans.
You're calling a shot, huh?
I was talking to Rob last night and I said, I'm really excited that Chicago and Washington have the first 2 picks because, God, we need to disperse some talent to the NFC because I believe all our teams are in the AFC. I think we're sick of the gauntlet that you have to run if you want to try to win a championship. Meanwhile, you got Brock Purdy, Baker Mayfield, and Jared Goff and Jordan Love are in your NFC championship game. I am sick of it. And I really hope Caleb Williams and Drake May are playing quarterback in the NFC. Guys, thank you so much for your time. And you've been a pleasure. As a reminder, Forward Progress will be back again Thursday at 2:00 with our prediction show with Rob Pizzola, Eric Eager, Suma, and Hitman giving you their best bets. I know we all did pretty good last week, and let's follow it up with a strong week. Drop us a like before you bounce. That's it for me. Thanks to Cleve TA. Thanks to Suma. Thanks to Sharp Clark, and thanks to producer Jason. And of course, to you, the audience, the best audience we could ask for. Until next time.